I'll never forget the moment it happened. At my own son's Christmas party, with laughter echoing through the grand halls and carols playing softly in the background, he wrapped his arms around me in front of everyone and said the words that shattered the evening. "Mom, I hope you're enjoying the $8,000 I send you every month." My heart nearly stopped. $8,000. Every month? I pulled back and searched his face, certain I'd misheard. The guests around us chuckled politely, as though my stunned silence was simply modesty. But I wasn't being modest, I was in disbelief. "Son," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what money?" For a long second, he just stared at me, his smile faltering. "The allowance," he said, his tone confused now, "the one I've been depositing into your account for over a year." The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with anticipation. My hands shook as I tried to find words. I've never received a single cent," I confessed, my voice cracking under the weight of truth. Around us, the chatter died away until only the crackling of the fireplace remained. Then I heard it, a gasp sharp enough to cut glass. All eyes turned. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, stood frozen at the dining table, her champagne flute trembling in her hand, her face pale as snow. She looked at me, then at my son, and in that instant her composure fractured. "Before I continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and drop a comment with your city. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. It means the world to me and keeps these stories alive for you." I could feel my pulse in my throat as my son slowly released me from his embrace and turned his gaze toward his wife. "Rachel," he said, his voice low but sharp, "what do you know about this?" His tone sent a chill through the room. Rachel stammered, her lips parting, but no sound escaping. Just minutes earlier, she'd been the perfect hostess, laughing, charming, radiant in her designer gown. Now, she looked like a guilty child caught red-handed. My son stepped closer, his face hardening, while I stood motionless, torn between fear and fury. "Mom," he said, turning back to me, his voice breaking now, "you're telling me you never got a single payment?" "Not one." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "I'm still working 3 jobs just to survive," I said quietly, shame prickling my cheeks. A murmur rippled through the guests. Wealthy executives, friends, family, they all knew what those words meant. My son's fortune was legendary, and here I was, his own mother, confessing that I lived in exhaustion and need. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers shaking as he scrolled through his banking app. Rachel rushed forward suddenly, her voice strained and falsely bright. "Darling, maybe this isn't the right time. Let's not ruin the evening," she pleaded, but he held up his hand to silence her, his jaw set. My son turned the screen toward me. There it was, transaction after transaction, each for $8,000, labeled with my name. My breath caught as I leaned closer. The numbers were real, the payments undeniable. But then I saw it, the account number was wrong. And the name beneath it wasn't mine. It was hers. Rachel Adams, my daughter-in-law. The room seemed to tilt as realization struck. She had intercepted the money all along, opening an account under her own name and living off what my son thought was mine. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. Gasps rose around us, the guests' shock filling the silence. Rachel's mask finally slipped, her face twisting, as she realized the truth had come to light. My son's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Tell me it isn't true," he demanded, his eyes blazing as he stared at her. I clutched the back of a chair, fighting the wave of nausea and anger that threatened to consume me. Rachel's lips trembled, her eyes darting frantically. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then, with a bitter edge in her voice, she spat, "Fine. Yes. I took it." The words dropped like stones in the silence. My son recoiled, his face pale with shock, while I pressed a hand to my mouth, barely containing the sob clawing its way out. Rachel's words hung in the air like poison, and the festive warmth of the Christmas party drained away in an instant. The fire still burned the hearth, but I felt cold to my very bones. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering in disbelief, others simply frozen in their places, unwilling to move and miss a single moment of what had erupted in the center of the room. My son, Michael, stood stiff, his fists clenched at his sides, staring at his wife with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It wasn't just anger, it was devastation, betrayal, and something even darker, as though the very foundation of his trust had been ripped out from beneath him. Rachel, however, seemed to grow bolder in the silence, perhaps thinking that confession was safer than denial now that the evidence was undeniable. She squared her shoulders and snapped, I did it for us. For our future, for our family. Your mother doesn't need that kind of money. She's been living just fine without it. Her voice grew shrill, and the words pierced my chest like daggers. Just fine. I repeated in disbelief, my own voice trembling. Rachel, I've been scrubbing hospital floors at midnight and standing behind cash registers until my legs give out just to keep food on the table. Do you call that fine? My throat tightened, but I refused to let the tears spill. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Michael's face flushed red as he advanced a step toward her. That money was for my mother. Every single dollar. I trusted you, Rachel. I believed you were handling it. How could you do this to her? How could you do this to me? His words came out like thunder, echoing across the room. Rachel flinched, but then her eyes hardened and she fired back. Don't act like this is some grand betrayal. I was thinking about us. About the children we'll have, the future we need to build. You give away money like it's candy, Michael, while I have to think about reality. Investments, mortgages, security, things that actually matter. She spat the word mother like it was a burden, and I felt a surge of heat in my chest, a righteous fury I hadn't known I possessed. I stepped forward, my voice strong despite the tremor in my hands. Reality, I demanded. The reality is that I sacrificed everything for my children, and when my son finally tried to give something back, you stole it for yourself. You let me break my back while you lived in luxury off money that wasn't yours. My voice cracked, but I raised it higher so that every guest in that glittering mansion could hear. You robbed me of rest, of peace, of dignity. And you did it with a smile on your face, pretending you cared. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the women shook their heads in disgust. A few men exchanged sharp glances. Rachel's cheeks flushed crimson, and for once she had no clever retort. She tried to laugh, a brittle, hollow sound that rang false in the silence. Oh, come on, she said weakly. Don't act like I ruined her life. She's old. She doesn't need so much. We needed it more. We're the future. Michael's eyes widened at her words. Old, he repeated slowly, his voice dangerous in its quiet. That woman you're talking about is my mother. She worked her fingers to the bone so I could have a future, and you. He stopped, his voice breaking. He turned his gaze to me then, and I saw the boy I had raised, standing there as a man, torn apart by what his wife had done. Mom, he whispered hoarsely, I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. I thought you were safe. For the first time, his voice cracked and his eyes shimmered with tears. My heart ached for him, for the guilt he carried, though none of this was his fault. Rachel tried to close the gap, reaching out to touch his arm. Michael, listen, she began, but he recoiled as though her touch burned. His voice cut her down like a blade. No, don't. Not another word. The fire in his eyes silenced her instantly. He turned back to his phone, scrolling with quick, jerky movements. Every payment, every month, it all went to you, he said through clenched teeth. He held the phone up again, this time so the nearby guests could see as well. The evidence glared from the screen. Deposits labeled for me, all transferred to Rachel's account. A collective gasp rose, and humiliation painted itself across Rachel's face. I felt my knees weaken, and I grabbed onto the arm of the chair beside me to steady myself. All the exhaustion, all the years of loneliness and work, the missed meals, the unpaid bills, it had all been unnecessary. My son had tried to protect me, and yet I had been abandoned, not by him, but by the woman who had vowed to be part of our family. Anger coursed through me, but beneath it, there was a strange, fragile relief. At least I knew the truth now. At least I knew my son's heart had never forgotten me. Rachel's mask shattered completely then. No longer elegant, no longer composed, she stood trembling, her hands shaking as she struggled to justify the unjustifiable. I did it for us, she repeated, but the words were weaker now, a whisper drowned in the rising tide of outrage that filled the room. Michael's voice, however, was strong and unyielding. You did it for yourself. For greed. And you dared to stand in this house, in front of my mother, acting as though you were a partner, a wife, a daughter-in-law. You've made a fool of me, and you've made her suffer. You disgust me. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Rachel's eyes darted around, desperate for support, but none came. Even her closest friends looked away, their faces twisted with shame and disapproval. For the first time, Rachel looked small, stripped of her polished armor of charm and wealth. My son stood tall, his hand trembling but his voice steady, and I felt something stir inside me, a mixture of pride, pain, and a deep, simmering rage at the woman who had stolen so much from me. The Christmas lights twinkled around us, but the air was thick with tension. I clutched the cross pendant at my neck, my heart hammering, as I braced myself for what would come next. The silence after Michael's words was almost unbearable. The grand chandelier above us glittered coldly, casting light on a scene that felt more like a trial than a holiday gathering. Rachel stood trembling, her face drained of its carefully painted confidence, and for the first time since I had known her, she had no quick wit, no charming smile to shield her. She looked cornered, and she was— My son's voice had cut through every last layer of her pretense, leaving nothing but raw truth exposed for all to see. I remained rooted to the spot, unable to believe that the woman I had trusted to stand by my son's side had stolen so much from me, had allowed me to work myself into exhaustion while she lined her life with stolen comfort. Michael slowly placed his phone down on the polished table beside him, his hand still trembling slightly. He turned his gaze toward me, and what I saw in his eyes nearly broke my heart: guilt, sorrow, and an aching regret. "Mom," he said, his voice low but steady, "you should never have had to endure this. I wanted you to be free, to finally rest after everything you've sacrificed. Instead, you've been carrying a burden you never deserved." His words pierced me. For all those nights I had fallen asleep with aching bones and blistered hands. I had wondered quietly if my son had forgotten me in the glow of his wealth. But in that moment, I understood the truth. He had not forgotten. He had trusted the wrong person. Rachel suddenly straightened her shoulders, as though trying to gather the shards of her pride, and her voice rose again, shrill and unconvincing. "Enough of this," she cried, her words cracking under the weight of her desperation. "You're making a spectacle of me in front of everyone. So what if I redirected the money? I did it for us, Michael, for the life we're building. Your mother doesn't need $8,000 a month. She doesn't need luxury. She's fine working. Work keeps her alive." I was being practical. The words spilled from her mouth like acid, stinging everyone who heard them. Gasps rose from the crowd, and one woman, a friend of Rachel's who had been sipping champagne all evening, set her glass down with a loud clink and muttered, "Shameful." I felt something inside me snap. My hands stopped trembling, and my voice came out clear and sharp, echoing against the high ceilings. "Practical," I repeated, my tone heavy with contempt. "You call it practical to let me scrub hospital floors until my hands bled, while you bought new dresses and dined in fine restaurants with the money my son thought he was giving me. You call it practical to leave me wondering why my own son never helped, while you pretended to care for me, all the while lying to both of us. You have no idea what sacrifice means, Rachel. None." My words seemed to strike her like blows, and her mouth opened, but no words came. She was cornered not only by the truth, but by her own arrogance. Michael's breathing grew heavier as he turned on her, his fury barely contained. "You think stealing from my mother is practical," he hissed, his voice sharp as glass. "You think lying to me, humiliating her, humiliating this family, is practical? Look around you, Rachel. Look at all these people. Do you see one single person who believes a word coming out of your mouth?" Rachel's eyes darted desperately from face to face, but she found no support, no sympathetic gaze. Everyone had turned cold. Even the relatives who had once adored her now looked at her with disgust, their faces hardened with judgment. The tension in the room was unbearable. I wanted to collapse into a chair to close my eyes and make it all disappear, but I stood tall, gripping the back of a chair with white knuckles. I would not let this woman break me. Not now. Not ever. Rachel's voice cracked as she tried again, her words rushing out like water through a broken dam. "Michael, please, you have to understand. We have a life together, a future. Everything I did for us. For you, for me, for the family we're building. I was protecting what we have." She clung to his arm then, her nails digging into his sleeve as though she could physically hold on to the life she had stolen. But Michael shook her off with such force that she stumbled backward, nearly dropping her champagne flute. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice like thunder. "Don't you dare talk about protecting this family when you've been tearing it apart with lies." The guests whispered again, some of them shifting awkwardly, clearly wishing they could leave, but too enthralled by the drama unfolding before them. I glanced at the tall windows, where the frost from outside glimmered under the moonlight, and I thought about the irony of it all. Christmas Eve, supposed to be a time of joy, of family, of warmth. And here we were exposing betrayal, watching love turn to ash. I finally spoke again, my voice quieter this time, but firm. Rachel, you may think you did this for your future, but all you've done is destroy the trust that held this family together. You've taken what wasn't yours, and in doing so, you've shown us who you really are. My words made her flinch, and for once she didn't try to argue back. She simply stood there, breathing heavily, her shoulders rising and falling as though she had run a great distance. Michael stepped closer to me then, putting a steady hand on my shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, his voice breaking, "you'll never have to go through this again. I promise you that." His grip was firm, protective, and for the first time in many years, I felt the weight lift ever so slightly from my weary shoulders. I looked into his eyes and saw not just anger or betrayal, but a fierce determination that filled me with both relief and dread. Relief because I knew he was finally standing by me. Dread because I could see in his face that something had shifted permanently, something that could never be undone. Rachel's sobs broke through the silence then, high and desperate. She fell into a chair, her head in her hands, her once perfect makeup smudged into streaks of black and red across her cheeks. The woman who had always prided herself on being untouchable, untarnished, was now crumbling before us all. And though a part of me pitied her, the larger part, the part that had suffered in silence for far too long, felt a grim satisfaction in watching her mask fall away. The room was heavy with judgment, thick with the stares of friends and strangers alike, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth had been dragged into the light, and there was no pushing it back into the shadows. I held my head high, even as my heart pounded, because one thing was finally clear. Rachel's lies had been exposed, and the world now saw her for what she truly was. The sound of Rachel's sobs echoed through the grand hall, but no one moved to comfort her. The glittering party had dissolved into something unrecognizable, no longer laughter and music, but raw silence broken only by her cries. The guests stood stiffly, some exchanging shocked glances, others openly watching with wide, disbelieving eyes. I stood beside my son, Michael, still trembling, but holding my head high. For years I had endured endless work, aching hands, lonely nights, and the humiliation of wondering why my own son never seemed to remember me. Now at last the truth was out for all to see. My son had cared. He had tried. And the woman he had chosen as his wife had stolen not only money, but dignity and peace from both of us. Michael's voice finally cut through Rachel's sobbing, deep and commanding. "Enough," he said, his tone icy. The words silenced the entire room. Rachel lifted her face, streaked with mascara, her eyes red and frantic, but Michael did not falter. He stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over her where she sat slumped in the chair. "You've humiliated me. You've humiliated my mother. You've stolen, lied, and mocked her suffering. And tonight, in front of everyone we know, you've proven exactly what kind of person you are." His voice trembled, but it wasn't weakness. It was fury contained by sheer force of will. Rachel pushed herself to her feet, her desperation turning into defiance. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," she snapped, her voice rising high. "Everything I did because you're too soft. You throw money around like it doesn't matter, while I was trying to secure our future. If anything, you should be thanking me for being practical, for protecting us from your own stupidity." Gasps rose from the guests, the words too sharp, too venomous to excuse. Michael's face went pale with shock at her boldness, then flushed red with anger. He pointed toward the staircase at the far end of the room, his finger steady, his eyes burning with rage. "Go upstairs," he said coldly. "Now. You've said enough." Rachel stood frozen, her chest heaving, but something in his voice told her not to push further. She turned abruptly, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, and stormed toward the staircase. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the fading sound of her footsteps and the final slam of the bedroom door above. Michael turned back to me then, his face softening, though his jaw remained tight. He reached for my hand, his palm warm and strong. "Mom," he said quietly, "I can't undo what's been done. But I promise you this, you will never want for anything again. I'll make sure of it. I thought I had been giving you freedom, but I see now that my trust was misplaced. I will fix this. You have my word." His eyes shone with tears he refused to shed, and in that moment, despite the chaos surrounding us, I felt my heart swell with pride. My son had been deceived, but he was not weak. He was ready to stand for me. The guests, unsure of whether to speak, slowly began to murmur among themselves. A few stepped forward to touch my shoulder, to whisper kind words of support. One older man shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." To steal from her own mother-in-law, another guest sighed and said softly, "At least the truth came out tonight." Their sympathy warmed me, but it also filled me with a deeper ache. How many nights had I worked myself into exhaustion while Rachel enjoyed the fruits of deceit? How many moments of rest, of peace, of joy had been stolen from me? The following hours blurred together. Michael dismissed the guests politely but firmly, assuring them that the evening was over. No one argued, no one dared. They departed quietly, their faces etched with the memory of the scandal they had just witnessed. When the last of them had gone, the house seemed impossibly quiet, the twinkling Christmas lights flickering faintly against the heavy silence. I sat down finally, my body aching with fatigue, and Michael knelt beside me. "I'll transfer everything directly to you from now on," he said, his voice gentle but resolute. "There will be no intermediaries. No one between us. I'll even make up for what you should have had already. You've suffered enough." Tears welled in my eyes, and this time I let them fall. For years I had carried my struggle silently, never asking for help, never demanding more than what I could earn with my own hands. And now, to hear my son speak with such certainty, such fierce devotion, it was like a weight lifting from my shoulders. I clasped his hand tightly. "Michael," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I never wanted your money. I only ever wanted to know that you remembered me, that you cared." He pressed my hand firmly, his eyes wet. "I care more than anything, and I will prove it every single day from now on." Rachel did not return downstairs that night. The silence from above was telling. Whether it was shame, anger, or fear that kept her away, I could not say. But I knew, deep in my heart, that her place in this house, in this family, had already crumbled beyond repair. Trust, once broken so deeply, cannot be rebuilt with flimsy excuses and false apologies. I rose slowly, leaning on Michael's arm, and together we stood before the towering Christmas tree. Its lights glowed warmly, casting our faces in a soft, golden light. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. Despite the betrayal, despite the heartbreak, I knew I was not alone anymore. My son was beside me, stronger than ever, and the truth had freed us both from the shadow of deceit. That Christmas night ended differently than I ever imagined it would, but in some strange way, it became a beginning too. A beginning of honesty, of love reclaimed, of a bond between mother and son that no greed could ever sever again. And as I stood there, the glow of the lights reflected in my son's tearful eyes, I felt certain of one thing. Rachel had taken her place in the past, but Michael and I would face the future together. If you've been moved by this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give it a like, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories alive.